Each phase in Magic has a lot of nuance to it, so I wanted to make a video talking about some of the interesting things you can do with each phase, so you can use each step and phase to its max. But first, if you want to buy some cards to cast in main phase 2, you can go to this video's sponsor, Cool Stuff Inc., and use code TTM at checkout to get a discount. Plus, it supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. Let's start with main phase 2. Information is a very powerful thing in Magic. Anyone who's ever cast a Gitaxian Probe knows this. Checking your opponent's hand for interaction is very useful when trying to drop a finisher. So when you go to attack, if you've already cast things in main phase 1, you've given away free information. As you spend mana before combat, the pool of cards you could be holding up dwindles, especially if you tap out. I've seen a lot of people do this maneuver. When they're out of cards, they draw one for turn and just play it because it's a land, and then they move to combat and attack. This signals to me I'm totally free to remove whatever is attacking because I know there isn't anything more threatening coming up. And I'm not saying holding up that one card will always dodge removal, but it sometimes can. Using main phase 2 is a great way to sneak past removal, since they might be too scared of the unknown card and won't want to use the one spot removal card they have, thinking you might play an even more threatening card. It's also a great way to get in chip damage before board wipe. Sometimes I'll have a few random creatures in play, and before I cast my Wrath, I'll swing all out at someone just to get in a little bit of damage. There are also specific cards that utilize main phase 2 really well. Mana Drain is actually one of those. It gives you mana at your next main phase, meaning if you use this defensively on your turn to blank removal, then you can just move to main phase 2 and get that colorless mana. Carpet of Flowers is another card that is similar. Since it triggers at the beginning of each main phase, you can cast it main phase 1 and use it main phase 2. Just keep in mind you don't get to use the ability twice a turn, just once on one of the main phases. Morog is another one. I've seen multiple players make this mistake, where they play a land in main phase 1 with Morog in play. The way this card is worded, it creates a new combat phase after the phase where you play a land, and creatures get untapped during that special new combat phase. So if you play a land main phase 1, you get the special combat step right after that, and then you move to normal combat. But in normal combat, your creatures don't untap at the beginning of the phase, so you won't be able to use your creatures after they attack, unless they have vigilance. So with Morog, you should really be waiting and playing those lands in main phase 2. If you have any other examples of cards that make use of main phase 2 specifically, let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. So am I saying not to cast anything in main phase 1? Of course not. Beyond the obvious, like playing Craterhoof effects before combat, there are reasons to use main phase 1. It's really great against someone who has watched this video. Someone who is aware of the fact that you're trying to bait them into casting spells by not playing anything main phase 1. You can do a little bit of reverse psychology, or I guess level 2 thinking. By playing something small main phase 1, then attacking, your opponent might be more likely to then use removal on the attacking creature, thinking you only have one other card in hand and you've already cast something. Other than that, and maybe saving time, like if you cast a spell and pass turn, I honestly don't cast spells in main phase 1. As long as I have creatures to attack with, of course. If you don't have creatures to attack with, the whole main phase 2 thing doesn't matter. Next, let's talk about the beginning phase. Untap, upkeep, draw. So if you don't know, untap is something you actually can't interact with. Players don't have priority, meaning cards like Seedborn Muse or Unwinding Clock do not have a time when you can interact with them once the turn has passed. You need to destroy these on an end step. Upkeep is the first time you can actually do something. So many players assume this is the best time to cast removal or whatever. But in multiplayer, it's honestly not. While it is true you want to use removal before a player's draw step so that they have one less card to respond with, why are you letting them untap? You should utilize the previous opponent's end step. That's the best time to fire off your removal because they haven't untapped nor drawn a card. Speaking of drawing cards, the draw step is an often overlooked phase. There are times where using the draw step can be even better than the upkeep. I've had a lot of players sacrifice their Mind Slicer on my upkeep, which means I still get to draw my card for turn. If you have instant speed discard, waiting for their draw step can sometimes be beneficial. Same with effects that search your opponent's hand. This is less relevant for EDH, but surgical extraction is great to use during the draw step, since if they draw a second copy of whatever you extracted, you also get to take a card from their hand. Now let's move to the big one, the combat step. This is easily the most complicated and nuanced step in the game. Combat is broken up into multiple phases. As this helpful infographic says, don't forget that mana pools empty at the end of each phase. The first part is the entering combat or beginning of combat phase. This is most relevant in EDH. This phase is where the real politics happens. Once you're in combat and we've moved here, there's another round of priority, but your opponent, whose combat step it is locked out of sorcery speed actions, meaning what is on the board currently is probably going to be everything that'll be there for the combat step. But nothing has attacked yet, so no attack triggers and no damage yet. This is where I try to make deals. You can ask questions like, hey, who is that 10-10 swinging at? Or threaten removal. You can say like, hey, if it were to swing my way, maybe it would get exiled. Using politics here is very effective and can easily save you a lot of damage in the long run. Even if you don't have any tricks up your sleeve, just talking about where a creature will theoretically swing can spook some players. If you're going to make deals, make them here. Next is the declare attacker step. This is something I see players mess up all the time in Commander. Even if something did attack you, don't fire off your removal right away. First, let the attacking player decide all their attacks. They might have some effects that require them to hit multiple people, so to prevent confusion about who is being attacked where, just wait and let them decide all of their attacks at all players before doing anything. Then, you still don't want to fire off your removal. Wait in priority order. Sometimes you won't need to use that spot removal. Cards like Aetherize bounce all attacking creatures, not just those swinging at the player casting the spell. Fog effects affect all players as well. You might be able to save some removal if you give your other opponents a chance to cast a fog. The declare blocker step is also really important. I usually want to wait and see what players block with before using something like a fog effect or Aetherize. Because yes, there might be damage coming at you, but if you don't wait till the declare blocker step, you're never going to know if your other opponent is going to block with their Drannith Magistrate or not. And sometimes if they are blocking with it, you might not use a fog even if you take a lot of damage because you want that Magistrate gone. Try to use your interaction at the last possible moment. Outside of attack triggers, you have plenty of steps before you actually take damage. Speaking of which, then we have the damage step, which has actually gotten simpler over the years. Back in the day, damage actually went on the stack, which made cards that could swap their power and toughness way stronger. But that's no longer the case. When damage is done, it's done. It doesn't go on the stack anymore. And lastly, one of the most important parts of combat is the end of combat step. This is a really interesting time in the game because the creature has already attacked, done damage, yet counts as an attacking creature, meaning you can attack with something, deal damage, and then afterwards use ninjutsu to bounce it back to your hand and put your ninja into play. The new ninja will enter tapped and attacking, but won't do damage since the damage step has already happened. In theory, if you had infinite mana, you could actually just keep swapping the same ninjas with each other back and forth over and over again at the end of combat, although that will probably never come up. What might come up is Maze of Ith. Most people look at this card and think that it is a defensive tool, which it is, but you can use it on your own creature to give pseudo-vigilance. Same with Reconnaissance. Even though these cards either prevent the damage the creature will deal or take the creature out of combat, if you use it after the damage step, damage will still happen, it doesn't get reverted. Using these, you can give creatures essentially vigilance by using the effect in the end of combat step. It also means that removal, which works on attacking creatures like Azorius Charm or Wing Shards, can be used on something that didn't attack you without stopping the damage. You can allow it to hit your opponent for all that damage, and then, before combat ends but after damage, Azorius Charm it. Naturally, the last thing to talk about is the end step. Although it's not like I really went in order in the rest of the video, so maybe it's not the natural thing to do. Regardless, the end step is great. This is the time to fire off removal, flash in your threats, or cast your instant speed card draw. The end step before your turn is the best place to do so because it's the smallest point where your opponents could interact. If you're a control player like me, then I know you love the end step before your turn. But even if you're not a control mage, that end step before the blue player's turn is still really important. I see this a lot where people will just run their removal into my counterspells. And then later in the game, I can activate my Thrasios and redraw all those counterspells on an end step. But if they saved that removal and waited till I spend my mana to activate the Thrasios or flash in some card, then I don't have my protection up, meaning that's the time to go in against a control deck. Wait till they go shields down. If you're struggling against control decks, especially blue ones, use as little sorcery speed removal as you can. Try and see if you can bait them into spending their mana elsewhere, then it's your time to strike. Those were all the interactions about phases I wanted to talk about today. Did you learn something new? Do you have any other phase-related gameplay tips? If so, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so very much for watching. This video topic was voted on by my patrons. If you want to vote on video ideas or get your name in the credits like my tier 3 patrons, check out the link in the description.